Taoiseach, what has emerged in the last week about the conduct of not one but two Fine Gael ministers is deeply concerning. It raises fundamental questions about standards in public life, and standards in public office and trust in politics, the rule of law and indeed the integrity of our democracy. One minister has already resigned without answering any questions, and further, the minister responsible for ethics reform is now under investigation for undisclosed election donations. It's certainly welcome that Minister Donoghue will make a statement this afternoon in the Dáil and take questions, but regrettable that it appears there will be no facility for responses to our questions. And the revelations are all the more concerning, Taoiseach, when a fringe minority is seeking to sow distrust and attack elected representatives to further a vicious far-right agenda. We all know the power of politics to transform the lives of people, but unfortunately we know politics can have a dark side too. And for many years, our political system was plagued with corruption and with grubby deals. And for decades, we in the Labour Party fought to stamp out corruption. We called out corruption in the planning system when it took place years ago. We sought to pass ethics laws. We ensured the passage of the right to freedom of information, protection for whistleblowers, a register for lobbyists. We ensured the limits on donations and the limits on the power to purchase influence. But on the necessary further ethics reform, unfortunately, since 2016, we've seen this government and the previous government sitting on their hands, both Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael failing to move further with necessary reforms. Deputy Brendan Howland's Standards in Public Sector Bill of 2015, which would overhaul SIPO, give it the necessary extra powers it has sought for a long time. That bill was last debated in this chamber exactly 7 years ago, Taoiseach. 20th January 2016, and it was stalled then and shelved by your government in July 2020. So my first question is, when will you commit to introduce that bill, and who will be responsible for taking it through the House? Will it be you, Taoiseach? Secondly, a Minister of State resigned last week when it was revealed that false information was submitted on a planning application. That cannot be the end of it. As the leader of Fine Gael, can you say that this is behaviour your party tolerates? And do you think that it's tenable for a TD to remain in your party, having given false information on a planning application that they benefited from? Finally, Taoiseach, what we know about the donation in 2016 to Minister Donoghue is still limited. We still need to know more. It appears that a company and its owner picked up the costs of his election postering without his knowledge, a highly unusual arrangement to say the least. How can Minister Donoghue be clear that this was a donation to the party and not to the candidate to help his re-election in reality? And how can we trust what has been disclosed to date, in particular the commercial value that Fine Gael has put on the donation, where, Taoiseach, is the evidence that you have to back up the revised disclosure? Can you tell us how the commercial value was determined? And can you tell us, is it common practice in Fine Gael for business people to pick up postering costs for individual candidates?
Taoiseach.
Thanks, Deputy. First of all, I just think it's important to state as a matter of fact that Minister Donoghue is not yet under investigation by the Standards Commission. A complaint has been received and that body will consider the complaint. They will then decide whether or not there should be a preliminary inquiry, and on foot of that they will then decide whether or not there should be an investigation. So I think it's important that people not claim that he's under investigation when that is factually not the case. That may change, but it is not the case today. Deputy, in terms of the cost of renting a van, that's an easy thing to do. I actually did it myself at the weekend when I first heard about this, and I looked up what it costs to rent a van, and anyone can see what it costs to rent a van for the course of a day or a few hours, as the case may be, and it's well under €200. People run their election campaigns in different ways. I don't know how you run yours, but I've always run mine, or at least in the last couple of general elections, I've always run mine through our party account, through the Fine Gael Dublin West account, not through a personal account. I appreciate other people do things differently, particularly if there's two candidates from the same party in a constituency. It might be done through a different mechanism, but I've done it through a constituency account, and I imagine that's what Minister Donoghue has done as well. And it is important to say in relation to this donation that this was a donation that Minister Donoghue did not receive in person, nor did he give the donation in person. This was a third party who paid people to put up some posters for Minister Donoghue, a third party giving a donation, giving money to a fourth and fifth and sixth party, and Minister Donoghue was not aware of it. And I imagine there are plenty of people in this House who are wondering, is it possible that somebody could have done something similar in their circumstances? Maybe that's not the case. But say, for example, just to give you a small example, we've all seen in election campaigns taxi drivers bringing people to the polling station. A taxi is a commercial vehicle. Was that declared? There are lots of things in this that need to be figured out, deputies, and that needs to be taken into regard. If somebody came down, for example, from another jurisdiction, helped out for a day or two, and they were given a few bob by a third party or a fourth party to help cover their petrol or diesel expenses, that's something that should have been accounted for as well. We need to bear. Yes, it is, deputy, and we need to bear all of that, all of that,
€5,000
all of that in mind.
to put up posters and take them down.
Finally, just in relation to the Lobbying Act. And the legislation that was brought in. And I acknowledge the Labour Party's contribution to making reforms in this area. And a lot of that period, in fact, all of that period, you were in government with my party. And yes, we did bring in the Lobbying Act. We did bring in an effective ban on corporate donations. We did bring in an FOI Act. We brought in whistleblowers legislation, which this is now being strengthened by this government. And this new government will strengthen the Ethics Act as well.
Very much. Deputy Batchik.
Taoiseach, with respect, you haven't answered any of my questions, and indeed your response has shed no clarity and perhaps obscured things further. The crucial point here is that we cannot see any return to the bad old days when politics in Ireland was plagued by corruption and by grubby deals and by cronyism. We can't see that, and we need to be sure that that won't happen again. So, Taoiseach, I'm repeating my question. In respect of Minister English, is that behaviour your party tolerates, the submission of false information on a planning application which resulted in a benefit to the individual? I can't put it any clearer than that. What action are you taking on that as leader of Fine Gael? On the issue of Minister Donoghue, did Minister Donoghue receive a written acknowledgement, as required by SIPO guidelines 1.3.4, to confirm that this was a donation to the party and not to the candidate? What evidence is there that the employees were paid personally rather than through a corporate account to put up the posters? And finally, is it acceptable to you that there was such a long delay between Minister Donoghue apparently becoming aware of the inadvertence or the error in the disclosure and the rectification of that error so recently in the last few days? You know, is that acceptable to you, Taoiseach, that delay in rectifying the disclosure?
Taoiseach.
Thanks, Deputy. Of course, what Minister English did in relation to his planning application 14 years ago is not acceptable, not to my party, not to this government, and not to anyone. That's why he resigned. And he resigned, and he no longer holds office in this government. Party matters are separate, and we have a party disciplinary process, and that's not a matter for this chamber, deputies. In relation to SIPO and Minister Donoghue's explanation of affairs, he will answer questions this afternoon, has agreed to do so in the Dáil. And if SIPO asks him to produce any evidence, well, then he will have to do that if they carry out an inquiry. And he accepts that the delay in putting his affairs in order was a mistake. He acknowledges that and apologises for it. When he became aware of this a few months ago, he should have made changes to his declaration then. And he deeply regrets that he didn't, because we would not be in this position today had he done so. Lots of people in this House have amended their declarations retrospectively in all parties when they became aware of an omission. And he deeply regrets that he didn't do that at the time. Just in relation to responsibility for policy in these matters, Minister Donoghue is recusing himself from that until all of these matters are resolved. And by means of a transfer order, we intend to transfer responsibility back to Minister McGrath. He's the person who has been working in this area for the last 2.5 years, knows it already. It makes sense that he should have those powers transferred to him.